There we go. So, good morning once again, class. And I hope that everyone is doing well, feeling well, and post defense hangovers are gone for so that we may focus on today's lesson. But before we start, I'd like to remind you of a few things. Next week will be the start of your exams. Of course, June 30 to May 6 will be the summative, and May 6 sorry, May 30, sorry, time machine. May 30 to June 3 will be your summative exams. Meanwhile, June 6 to June 10 will be your quarterly exams. The details of which I will be posting in our Google Classroom to serve as your guide for your reviews. And of course, the slides that I have given you all throughout the quarter will serve as your reviewers. The coverage of the exam is not cover to cover, it is only from lesson 5 to lesson 8. Okay? Some have already expressed some concern na kinakabahan daw sila, Ma'am, cover to cover po ba 1 to 8? Hindi. 5 to 8 lang po. Okay? So, today we are going to dive right into our lesson. Will you'll understand why there is no game or pre-game or pre-activity before we start later on. Okay, so today we are focusing on lesson 8, which is the last lesson of the semester. So let's start with, of course, our lesson aims. Okay, in each lesson we have some aims or objectives we need to achieve by the end of the lesson, and this time our aims are to identify the meanings of the terms used in this lesson. So we'll have different terms and different story elements that we're going to discuss. I hope that by the end alam nyo na kung ano ibig sabihin nila. Next is explore the different types of the story elements in this lesson. So we have three story elements that we're going to talk about in this lesson, all of which will be revealed to you in time. So hopefully we'll explore the different types of those lessons and, of course, how writing them affects the story. And last, we're going to write your own short story. As the last lesson and the last activity of the quarter and the semester itself, the main goal is to see if you can now apply all of the knowledge we have gained from lesson 1 up to lesson 8 about writing. So the main goal here is to see if you can now write your own short stories. I'm confident that you can as well. Okay, so next. So those are our lesson aims. So starting our lesson, let's have a guess. This is what we call Pictionary. So with the pictures, I want you to say, I want you to guess what term or what story element is being depicted here. Okay, so you can
Conflict,
chat.
ma'am.
Ayan, Marvin, thank you so much. It is. Can you repeat that again for the second time?
Conflict po.
Okay. So that this is conflict. So as you can see, two people who have the thunderstorm between them. We have the word versus here. So that's conflict. Okay. So let's look at the meaning of conflict. In conflict, or in literature, a conflict is a literary device characterized by a struggle between two opposing forces. When we say two opposing forces, as you can see here, it is not specified that those two opposing sides are both characters. Okay? So, because sometimes, as you'll see later on in our lesson, sometimes the conflict or the source of the conflict for the characters is not a person or a character at all. Okay? So why do we need conflict? Conflict provides crucial tension in any story and is used to drive the narrative forward. In any story, we need conflict because it is what motivates the character or the plot to move forward. Okay? So, for example, in any Yes, there are different factors. Thank you for sharing that, Shello. There are different factors when we say conflict. It can also affect how the characters act and the characters how they think. Okay? So, sometimes it can also reveal deeper meanings in narratives. Okay? So, let's say sometimes the conflict between two people can somehow be can somehow be different feelings coming to light. Ito nga yung sinasabi natin na minsan, very cliche in Filipino cinema wherein at the beginning, they start off being conflicted with one another, being almost enemies with one another. And then, after that, they start developing feelings for one another. So that's something that we can look at in conflict. Now, conflict has many different types. Specifically, six. There are six types of conflict we use in writing and in literature. All of these types can be mixed and matched and used all together. But remember, we have to use the best one to describe or to create in our story. So, the six types of literary conflict. Can someone help me out by first reading the meaning of character versus self? The first bullet lang. Um, yes. Sige. Miss Ribu, please read the first sentence. Okay. You'll be next, Shello. Sige. Miss Ribu, Svetlana. Sige.
Yung first bullet lang po.
Yes, the first bullet.
This is an internal conflict, meaning that the opposition the character faces is coming from within.
Okay. So, I'd like you to take note of that. It is an internal conflict and the opposition is coming from within. So that's character versus self. In here, I have the example, Spider-Man 3. This is not the No Way Home. This is the old Spider-Man 3, the 2007. Maybe some of you weren't even born yet. Kind of a Spider-Man movie. So in this movie, Peter is being is having a lot of internal struggles, not just because he's being possessed by an alien entity, but also because he's having some struggle revealing his powers, living his life in a normal way because of his duties as a superhero. Okay, so aside from having being possessed by another force, which is another type of conflict, he is having some struggles with his personal life as well. So that is an example of character versus self. This may entail a struggle to discern the moral or right choice. Okay? So sometimes it is the character's morality that is in question. Okay? They are struggling to decide what is right, what is wrong. Kung ano ang tama, kung ano ang mali. Okay? So if you're writing a story of character versus self, the conflict could be as easy as the character finding a bag of money. Let's say your main character found 1 million pesos in a bag, and he struggles financially, and now he is also struggling because he doesn't know whether to return the money, which is the moral and right thing to do, or to keep it for himself. Okay, so that's morality. Another thing for character versus self, mental health. Okay, of course, nowadays, mental health has come to light as one of the biggest conflicts, not just in literature, but also in real life. Many of us, I personally have struggled with my mental health in the past few years, in the past few months, and it is an internal struggle. Okay, so it's about coming from within. Okay, so that's something that is something that we can write about, especially since most of us, if you remember our lesson in style and in theme, most of us can get inspiration from our personal experiences. So if you have struggled like this before, that can be an inspiration for the conflict that you choose for your story. Okay? A good example of a story that brings the conflict as mental health struggles is Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. Okay? If you have the time, you can look it up on the internet. So, the next type of struggle is character or conflict is character versus character. Shella, I believe you excuse me, you volunteered earlier. So just read the first bullet.
Character versus character. This is a common type of conflict in which one character's need or wants are at odds with another's. Ayun po.
Okay, thank you so much, Shello. So This is the most common type of conflict because it's also the easiest to write. Because it is easier to pit one character versus another, to have two existing people be in conflict with one another. Sometimes the conflict can be straightforward and easy, or straightforward and simple, like physical fights and just wanting different things. For example, here I have Tom and Jerry. Okay? Some of you may not know Tom and Jerry. They were very popular when I was a child. Uh, when I was which seems so long ago. Ayan. Parang tanda na ni Ma'am doon ah. Wait. No, Tom and Jerry, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with them, they are quintessentially depicted as a cat and a mouse, which we know in nature do not get along. Okay, so Tom just wants to protect the house. He doesn't want pests, or he doesn't want other people or other beings being abusive or destroying the house. Jerry just wants to live in the house. Yun nga, since they are by nature enemies, that's their conflict between one another. They want and need different things, which give them conflict. Another example of this, very common in Filipino cinema or Filipino shows, is the love triangle. Sometimes two women or two men want the same person, and that makes them at odds with one another. Okay? So sometimes it's that simple. But sometimes it's also very much intricate and nuanced. There is a complexity. Komplikado yung laban. Okay? Hindi lang basta-basta, I hate you, you hate me. And sometimes other people are manipulated, other people are involved in the conflict without having to be without being directly involved. So for example, we have here Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is a show, it's set in medieval times, a fantasy medieval times, and a lot of that show is about war. Okay? So, dahil may mga tao na pareha silang gustong maging hari, okay? They both want to be king of this nation, but the problem is they can't both be king. So what they do is they start a war, and many people are affected, many people are hurt, and many people are killed because of their conflict with one another. So sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's easy and simple, but sometimes it's also very complicated. Okay? So it is up to you how you're going to depict character versus character. Now, in character versus character, it's just because it says character versus character, please take note, it can also be multiple people competing against one another. Okay? So, if there are multiple forces at odds with one another, it's not just two. Okay, hindi lang siya one versus one. Sometimes it's one versus another one. Sometimes it's five people fighting with one another. Okay? Yes, pwede rin pong animals. Characters are not exclusively people. Okay, tandaan nyo rin po yan. So, characters can be just like Tom and Jerry. They are somewhat anthropomorphized animals. When we say anthropomorphized, they are humanized to be more entertaining. So, sometimes animals can be at odds with one another. For example, Lion King. If you've watched Lion King, di ba po? Lion King is about Mufasa, his son Simba, who is supposed to be king, pero dumating si Scar, the brother of Mufasa, inagaw yung throne. Ice Age is another example of these are called fables, by the way. Stories that are predominantly that have predominantly human animal characters are called fables. Okay? So, that is character versus character. Thank you to Aliyah and Shelo for asking and clarifying those points. Next, we have character versus nature. Let's have Hill. Where's Mr. Hill? Nathaniel.
Yes. Uh,
Pakibasa
in
po.
a nature in a nature conflict, a character is set in opposition to nature.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hill. So, in a nature conflict, we are set in opposition to nature. This is what I was saying before when we were um, defining the term conflict. It's not always a person or a character versus another character. And it's not always the character versus himself. It is sometimes an outside force. Okay? So, nature versus character versus nature, this can mean we are in opposition, or the main conflict comes from what? The weather, the wilderness, or a natural disaster. Uh, yes, a tsunami. There's a movie about the tsunami that happened in Indonesia. It's starring Tom Holland. I forget the title, but yes, that's a good example. The Impossible, yes, that's about. I think that's about a storm, if I'm not mistaken. And there is also another one. Nika asked if the um what if Moana counted. In many ways, yes, because Teka is Mother Nature. Tefiti is nature embodied, so it can count as character versus nature. Yes, if it is virus, I know that is meant as a joke question, Aliyah, but yes, if it is a virus, or yes, that counts as natural disaster because it's a virus coming from nature. Okay, so um, zombies. How do I explain zombies? It depends on how they were created. If they were naturally created through for example, if you've watched Kingdom, the Korean zombie show, that is character versus nature, because the zombie virus came from nature, came from a flower. If it comes from technology, if it was developed in a lab, or it was artificially made, that is another type of conflict. Yes, Unknown is a good example. I haven't watched Unknown, but I have heard of it. So those are very good examples. Thank you for those. So it seems that you know a lot about character versus nature. Um, of course, another thing is animals. Okay, so if you watched Rampage, that is about giant animals that start to, yeah, Godzilla is a good example. Jurassic Park is a good example of character versus nature, because that's wilderness. Those are wild animals. Okay, so uh, this this type of conflict has become quite popular nowadays because it's timely. I'm sure you already know that some scientists are saying that we have a limited amount of time before climate change overwhelms us. And so, that being the inspiration, many people have written stories that bring that conflict to light. Okay, so our example here, of course, volcanic eruptions. Of course, that's the conflict. Okay, so in this type of conflict, it is crucial that the conflict is life and death. Okay? It is not character versus nature kung ambon lang. Okay? Parang it needs to be believable that this is really causing conflict to the story. That this is really causing tension. Okay? If it's just a mild drizzle or ambon lang, or sabihin natin very slight na lindol na hindi mo man lang naramdaman, that's not character versus nature. There really needs to be a struggle for survival. Okay? So that's character versus nature. The next we have character versus supernatural. Let's have Johan.
For the character versus supernatural, pitting characters against phenomena like ghosts, gods, or monsters raises the stakes of a conflict by creating an unequal playing field.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Johan. Now, when we are talking about character versus supernatural, from the word itself, supernatural beings. Okay? Ghosts, gods, monsters. Now, when we say gods, hindi God like in the Bible, gods like the Greek gods, different pantheons. Okay? The Greek gods, the Norse gods. Okay? So when we say these supernatural beings create an equal playing field, That is a good source of tension. Why? Because if you're a human being with no special abilities, with no, you're just a normal guy or a normal girl, and you're fighting up against something that has powers beyond your understanding. That is an amazing, uh, that is an amazing way to explore this conflict, because it can be a good way for you to start writing, um, the ingenuity, the strategy of how people can beat these type of supernatural c- creatures. Someone asked, does the Avengers or superheroes, do they count as character versus supernatural? Yes, uh, but it also counts as another conflict. As I said before, these conflicts, they can be mixed and matched. So some stories can have more than one conflict. Okay? So supernatural conflicts also cover characters. For example, Harry Potter, okay? And Odysseus, if you don't know Odysseus, this is from the he's the main character in the Greek epic, the Odyssey. The Odyssey, kung hindi nyo alam yung kwento nyo, ang pahapyaw lang is, sa sobrang daming beses pinaglaruan ng mga Greek gods si Odysseus, yung trip niya na dapat 3 years lang, naging 13 years. Yung trip niya pa uwi, galing sa isang war. Pinaglaruan kasi siya ng mga Greek gods. Kung saan pinagpasapasahan siya, kung kani-kaninong monster siya pinadala, and all of those things put together really contributed to how he traveled. Okay? So, Odysseus is sorry, the Odyssey is one of the Greek classic epics. Yan. So, pag ganito po, ang ating usually, it is found in a very particular genre of story. If it's character versus supernatural, what genre do we find this in? Can anyone answer? Or if we're fighting ghosts and monsters, what genre? Yes, thank you so much, Shello. That's very good. It's usually the horror or the thriller genre, because it's supernatural eh. Ayan, minsan mystery, but mostly mysteries are crime, or um that's crime, or sort of uh law related, if we're looking at mysteries. Syempre, especially now in contemporary literature. So, yan po, character versus supernatural. If you're a horror fan and if you'd like to write horror books, we can start, or horror stories, we can start with this conflict. Number 5, let's see. Sige. Uh, Mr. Marvin Lubiano. Again. Sorry. Ayan.
Um, in this case, a character is in conflict with some kind of technology.
Okay, so character versus technology, it's fairly self-explanatory. This conflict is when we are, usually human beings are in conflict with some kind of alien or advanced technology that we can no longer control. Okay, so this is what I was saying before. If the zombie was created in a lab, that's character versus technology. Okay? But if the zombie comes from a natural virus, okay, that is character versus nature. Yes, the Terminator is an excellent example of character versus technology. It is when we as people, usually it depicts we as the human race losing control over our technological creations, meaning that we can no longer control what we have created. They have risen up and they have taken control of us. Okay? Uh, yes, that's what I was going to give as an example. iRobot. If you haven't watched iRobot, it stars Will Smith. It's about a man who discovers that he live yung mundo pala na ginagalawan niya, unti-unti nang nakokontrol ng mga robot. Hanggang isang araw, nag-aklas na sila. Okay, they have risen up and they are trying to take control. Eh syempre dahil because the robots have been um Real Steel din, maganda rin yan. Um, Avengers, Age of Ultron, yes, that's also. I have conflicting feelings about that movie. We'll talk about that in some at some other time. Age of Ultron, if you didn't know, it's when Bruce and Tony Stark create essentially a super smart android. Nilagay nila sa isang robot, and the robot decides that I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to follow your orders. You're flawed, you're human. And then he starts a war, and then people are killed. So that's character versus technology. If you want to write character versus technology, but you're not too knowledgeable about technology or robotics or anything like that, I suggest you get some research, because most character versus technology conflicts need to be very believable. Okay? Kailangan ka panipaniwala na mag-aaklas talaga itong mga AI or mga artificial intelligence na ito. Okay? So, just take note of that. If it's character versus technology, do research so that it is believable. Yeah. The last is character versus society. It's quite long, so I'll just read it myself. A character versus society conflict is an external conflict that occurs in literature when the protagonist is placed in opposition with society. The government is a culture or a cultural tradition or societal norm of some kind. Now, character versus technology, yes. Hunger Games, Squid Game, Divergent, Maze Runner, any young adult novel published in between 2010 to 2019. Yes, that's it's mostly the dystopian kind of novels. Okay? So dystopian novels are post-apocalyptic. Okay? So, what happens in a character versus society setting or conflict is one person or a small group of people are trying to free themselves. Okay? Because they need the following things. They need to survive, they need to fight for what is right. They need they just want to be happy. And of course, they are fighting for freedom, justice, and or love. Okay? Remember that in a character versus society conflict, the character or the person or the people fighting the society must have a motivation. Okay? They can't just fight the society because they want to fight the society. They have to have internal motivation. They have to have that spark of hope. Okay? In the Hunger Games, the spark of hope was Katniss Everdeen. Okay? So, in Divergent, the series, the spark of hope was Tris, and yung nag-aaklas na sila. That's because character versus society stories are built on the concept of hope. Okay? Because are they serve as stories that remind us that no matter how controlling our society can be, people will still have hope. They will still have freedom and justice. Okay? Sabi nga dun sa kanta, hanggat may kabutihan, hanggat may pag-ibig, liwanag ay mananaig. Yes. Ayan. So, ganun po. Is Shrek, does this count as character versus society? Yes, in a way, it is one of the sub-conflicts or the minor conflicts of the story. But it is not the main conflict. The main conflict in Shrek, has always been character versus character. Kasi si Shrek at yung Lord, yun. But a sub or a minor conflict in that is character versus society, because he has to convince society that just because he looks like that doesn't mean he's a bad person. Okay? Or he's a bad character. Um, a good example of character versus society that isn't so big. Sometimes character versus society can be simple fights. Okay? Examples of this will be LGBTQ stories. Stories that have characters break societal norms or cultural traditions because they want to be happy, because they want to be with the people they love. Okay? If you I can't recommend any specific ones, but I know Heartstopper is a very good one. Die Beautiful, yes, that's a good one as well. Because it's just, that's who they are, that's who they want to be. And if they need to break societal norms, if they need to be them, if they need to break a couple of hearts to be who they are, they will do it. Okay? 'Di ba nga sa Die Beautiful, wala siyang pakialam, lumayas talaga siya. Mayaman sila eh, 'di ba? Kahit ayaw na sa kanya ng parents niya or ng dad niya. Yes, sa Brave then, that's a good example as well. Um, Merida didn't want, ayaw niya maging wife lang eh. 'Di ba? Ayaw niyang maging wife, parang gusto niya maging free, strong independent woman. So, ganun ang ginawa niya. She broke the societal norm. Medyo naguluhan lang ako sa plot doon kasi biglang naging bear yung nanay niya. Pero maganda naman yung Brave. Okay. So next, that's conflict, okay? So do you have any more clarifications with conflict, mga anak, before we move on to the next element? Okay, none daw si Shello. Okay, if there are no more clarifications with conflict, let's go on to the next. Okay, I think you can already guess what this is. Yes, Johan?
Ma'am, I think point of view po, ma'am.
Point of view, sabi ni Alia ay POV. I'm sure Nika, you were also going to say point of view. Point of view or perspective is the eye of the narrative. This is how we tell the story and whose voice we are using when telling the story. It is important that we know ahead of time the point of view of our story, because this is how the story will be revealed to us. If you're using first person point of view, it will be the story will be revealed to the reader as the character goes on with the story. If you're using second person point of view, it is much the same, but you are using different pronouns. If you're using third person point of view, depending on what type of third person point of view, your character either knows everything that is going to happen and reveals it ahead of time, which is somewhat problematic kasi wala ng suspense, or your narrator knows only what the character knows. We'll talk about that later on. So that's point of view. It's the eye. Okay? It's the voice that we are using in the narrative. So there are three types of points of view. Again, we have already talked about this. Pahapyaw lang natin ngayon just so you are reminded. So, the first person point of view, one of the characters is narrating the story, meaning that that character is in the center of the action. Okay? He is closely related. Mostly, or excuse me, in many cases, this person or the narrator is the protagonist. So, for example, in Hunger Games, it's a first person point of view. In Maze Runner, it's a first person point of view. In I forget if Allegiant, I forget if Divergent is first person, but basta if the pronouns that are being used are I, me, myself, I, mine. Okay, those are first person point of view. The good thing about first person point of view is that the character as the character goes through the story, the reader does as well. Okay? Everything is revealed through the character's eyes. So, yung reader, kumbaga, sabay nilang na-experience. Sabay na-experience ni character at ni reader yung mga bagay na dapat nilang ma-experience. Okay? So, that's first person point of view. Okay? Sa akin nangyari, ako yung character, kinukwento ko sa'yo. That's first person. Next is second person point of view. The second person point of view uses you pronouns. The you pronouns are the you, yourself, yours, okay? It is less common in novel length work, especially since it is quite a challenge. But the good thing about second person point of view is you can allow what? The reader to be very immersed or to feel like they are really part of the story. Okay? Kasi ninanarrate mo na kinukwento ko sa'yo kung ano yung nangyayari sa'yo eh. Ganun ang nangyayari sa second person point of view. So dahil kinukwento ko sa'yo kung ano yung nangyayari sa'yo, you feel like you're part of the story itself. Okay? Um, yes. A novel called Big Lights, Big Lights, Bright Lights, Big City. Yes, it's an American novel. I read a part of it. Unfortunately, it was not available. Parang free sample lang yung nabasa ko. But the opening line is, "You are not this type of man to be in this type of place at this early in the morning." So, the whole novel is in second person point of view. So, kapag binasa mo siya, ikaw yung main character. Kinukwento sa'yo kung ano yung nangyayari sa'yo. Ganun siya. And then, may pangalan ka doon, ganyan. So, Bright Lights, Big City. Next. Third person point of view. Sa third person, nangyayari sa kanila, kinukwento ko sa'yo. Ganun po. Okay? So, ikaw at ako, hindi tayo kasama doon sa action. Hindi tayo kasama doon sa story. Okay? Kinukwento ko lang sa'yo kung ano yung nangyayari sa kanila. That's third person point of view. The pronouns we use are he, she, his, hers, things like that. Okay? They, them. Okay? So, we have third person omniscient and third person limited. Kapag omniscient, tandaan nyo lang, the author knows everything. And kapag limited, it is also called closed third, or the author sticks closely to one character. Okay? But remains in third person. So, sa third person limited, the narration is very much like first person, but the pronouns are different. Okay? Third person pronouns pa rin. Pero sa third person omniscient, lahat alam ni narrator. Okay? He moves freely through time, through the thought. Nananarrate niya kahit hindi alam ni main character, nananarrate niya pa rin. So, minsan, ginagamit ito for it's common in love stories where two points of view are being exposed at once. Okay? Two feelings, two sets of thoughts are being exposed at once. Okay? So that's the difference between third person omniscient and third person limited. Ayan. So ito. I have here a good example or a good excuse me, illustration to see, just to visualize what a point of view may look like. So first person, okay, so this is let's pretend this is you, okay, so that's how the story is looking like. It's from the eyes or from the experience of the character. So for example, here we have Herman Melville's classic novel, Moby Dick, the first line of which is, "Call me Ishmael." So from the first line pa lang, alam na natin na first person point of view siya kasi it uses I, me, and first person pronouns. So call me Ishmael. Fun fact, it was never revealed if his real name is actually Ishmael. He just forced people to call him Ishmael. Okay? Next, second person point of view uses you and your. Ito yung sinasabi ko, by J. McLearney. Sorry, it's a very Irish name, but he's an American citizen. So it's his novel Big Lights, Big City, Bright Lights, Big City. The opening line of which is, "You are not the type of man to come to this type of place in this time of day." Okay, so you pronouns, second person pronouns ang ginagamit niya. And third person point of view, so ang nangyayari dito is, this is the second person, this is the first person, and someone who is not participating in the story at all, the third person. Okay? So, we can attribute this to the Mariteses of our neighborhood. They aren't part of the story, but they like telling the story, nevertheless. Okay? So first, the third person point of view uses he, she, it, or they pronouns. And an example of this is Leo Tolstoy's novel Anna Karenina, which is a Russian novel. The first lines are everyone has a family and hers was not any different. Okay, so her pronouns. And if I'm remembering correctly, I've read these. I haven't read one of these. I haven't read. Both of which I read very long ago. Okay, so forgive me if I'm mistaken in some of those. So, but that's the point. Okay, so remember the pronouns that we use in each point of view. Next, okay, for the last element, who would like to give a guess?
Plot,
Okay, sige, Nika. Can you say
plot
it
po.
again? Okay, plot
Plot.
or plots. Plot. Plot. So you can see here, there's a plot of land. This is the plot diagram, if I'm not mistaken. That's what it's called. And here, wag kayong matakot, hindi tayo magmamat ngayon. Because in math, this is called plotting. Di ba? Plot, yon. Baka mapahiya ako sa mata. Ayan, so plot is what happens in a story. Okay? These are the events that are happening in the story, but it is not just a simple sequence of events. So just because something has a sequence of events doesn't mean that it's a plot. Okay? A plot needs to have a centered moment, a moment that triggers the plot of a story. Okay? In many stories, this is when the character is introduced to the conflict. Okay? So you see the connection between the plot and the conflict. Okay? So when the character is introduced to the conflict, that is when the plot starts. And remember, in a plot, each scene exists to answer the question or to resolve the conflict. Okay, so there are different types of plots and plot devices, all of which, most of which we are going to talk about today. So we have first the elements of plot. Yes, Carl. Okay, sorry. Carl, can you mute yourself, please? Okay, sorry. So we have here the elements of plot. So plots must have at least five or four of these five elements. Well, I'll show you'll find out why we have at least four, because as at least three, because sometimes we have something called cliffhanger, wherein there is no falling action or resolution. It just ends at the most exciting part. Okay, so let's talk about each element first. Can someone please read the part where it says exposition? Alia.
Exposition. Beginning of the story where characters and setting are introduced, sorry.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, in exposition, I'm sure um you've encountered this before because you've taken 21st century literature. In exposition, this is the once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away. This is when we introduce the characters, the setting, okay? So the basics of the story, the things that the reader needs to know moving forward. Okay, who they're following, who they want, who where they're going, who they are, okay? Nasaan sila, saan sila nakatira, things like that. Next is the rising action. As you can see here, it is illustrated talaga as rising. Pataas talaga siya. Because in the words of the great Jody Santa Maria, this is where we find the conflict. And yun nga, so in the words of Jody Santa Maria, papunta na tayo sa exciting part. Ayan. Which is what we call the climax. Okay? So the most exciting part of the story, and it's also when we learn or find out the outcome of the conflict. So in the rising action, this is where the conflict is introduced. Okay? And then we have the climax where um uh, for example, this is where Thanos meets the Avengers, where um, Cinderella meets Prince Charming, things like that. Fun fact, ang pangalan po ni Prince Charming is literally Prince Charming. Hindi sila masyadong na creative doon sa pagpapangalan na yon. So in the Disney movie, the real name of Prince Charming is actually Prince Charming. Okay. So please name your characters better. Next is, so that's climax. After the climax, after we find out the outcome, or sometimes we don't even find out the outcome because cliffhangers are a thing, we go to the falling action. And this is where the events lead to the end of the story. This is where we resolve some of the minor plot points. This is what we call in the writing field as tying up loose ends. When we say tying up loose ends, it's when most of the plot lines are already resolved, and after that, we go to the resolution, which is the end of the story. Okay, so that at the end of the story, this is the happily ever after, or in some cases, this is the tragedy that happens. Okay, so um, either people are happy or they're not, or it in most contemporary literature, some writers like to write what are called realistic endings, which are not exactly happy endings, but they are more realistic and believable in real life. Okay, so yan po ang ating mga story or plot elements. So we have 7 types of plot, and these 7 types of plot are the ones used widely in writing. There can be, again, like the conflict, pwede po silang i-mix and match. They can be mixed and matched and played with one another. Um, they can be written to work with one another. But be careful with mixing and matching, because sometimes some of these plots are contradictory, or they do not complement one another. So it is up to you to decide which ones do you think are complementary to one another. So the first is tragedy. Um, nasa, let's see. Princess, can you please read the meaning of tragedy?
Tragedy. In a tragedy, your main character should undergo a major change of fortune. Almost always from good to bad, happy to sad, tragic characters have to suffer.
Parang brutal, no? Tragic characters have to suffer because that's the nature of a tragic plot. A tragedy, from the word itself, must have something tragic happen in them. The most common and most popular example of a tragedy is William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. I'm sure most of you already know the gist or the broad story of Romeo and Juliet, but for those of you who don't, it's essentially two people falling in love, a boy and a girl falling in love from two opposing sides of families. Magkaaway yung mga pamilya nila. So this is a forbidden love situation. And they get to fall in love, they got married, but after that, Romeo is exiled. Ano siya, banished, pinatapon siya sa kung saan kasi nakapatay siya. Now, etong si Romeo, si Juliet, nag-isip siya ng plano paano makakabalik si Romeo. So, Juliet decided to fake her own death. Magpapanggap siya na nagpakamatay siya. A letter was supposed to be delivered to Romeo explaining this so that he wouldn't be sad. Okay? Para lang bumalik si Romeo, yun yung plano eh. But unfortunately, the letter never got to Romeo. All Yes, me too. All he knows is Juliet is dead. Take note that Juliet is like 13 and Romeo is like 18 in this. Just side note. And then after that, Romeo finds Juliet seemingly dead. He kills himself. Juliet wakes up. Juliet wakes up, sees Romeo dead, kills herself. And the last line, yes, nagpakamatay sila pa. Let's not laugh at the mutual suicide that happened. Um, and the last line of Romeo and Juliet says, "There has never been a tale of more woe than Juliet and her beloved Romeo. So in modern English, there has never been a story that's sadder than Juliet and Romeo. So that's tragedy. Tragic characters need to suffer. In many cases, the tragedy is self-made. Okay? In many cases of tragedy, the characters have a hand or they have influenced their fates, and this all of their decisions have brought them to this tragedy. Okay? Either because yes, they are problematic people, and other times because they have chosen the wrong thing. Okay? So that's why tragedy works, because a lot of people still like the plot of tragedy or tragic plots because it it reveals that bad people will suffer. Romeo and Juliet weren't bad people. They were just they just made a lot of the wrong choices within the story. And that reminds us that if you keep making the wrong choices, the wrong things will happen. So that's tragedy. Tragedy is somewhat the opposite of the next type of plot, comedy. So let's have Eisen. Can you read the meaning of comedy for me, please?
Comedy. In comedy, even though your characters have defects, their defects should never wind up being painful or destructive. Comic characters make it thought uns- unscattered.
Unscathed.
Unscathed, sorry ma'am.
Ayan. Okay lang. Sige. So, thank you so much, Eisen. Now, when we say a comedy, the example I have here is Four Sisters and a Wedding. This is when each character has their own flaws, they have their own quirks, they have their own ways of making them, in essence, funny. Sometimes there are comedies that are not literally comedies; they are not very funny, but there's some sort of struggle. Okay, in the case of our example here, they are trying to sabotage or they're trying to stop the wedding of their younger brother. If I believe the name is CJ. So CJ wants to get married to a girl that he presumably loves very much, and pinipigilan yon ng mga ate niya. And in this case, there was a confrontation. There was a resolution after that confrontation. In many cases, in classic comedies, comedies that were written in the time of Shakespeare, there was no confrontation. uh, the defects of the characters were never corrected. But now in modern times, we usually correct those defects. Okay, and since in the nature of comedy is that it is a happy ending. Okay, but in reality, let's be honest, in reality, kung nalaman mo yung mga kapatid mo, sasabotahe yung wedding mo, papansinin mo pa ba sila? Kakausapin mo pa ba yan? Para sa akin, FO na yun agad-agad. But, yun nga, because this is a comedic film, because it's supposed to be a happy ending, CJ forgave her sisters, or his sisters. Okay? So, tandaan, in a comedy, it's usually a happy ending. Walang nadadamage. Unscathed. Okay? So, next. Let's have a hero's journey. Just the first bullet, Miss Gregorio. Yung first bullet lang po.
In a hero's journey, the hero of a story must undergo two things: recognition and reversal of a situation.
No, thank you so much. Now, in hero's journey, there are two things that happen. Recognition meaning they have to recognize that there is a task to be done. And they have to recognize that they are the only person who will be able to do that task. And the reversal of situation meaning they were not the same as they were in the beginning of the story. Example here is Moana. Okay? In Moana, they come from an island na bawal kang lumagpas sa laot. You can't go beyond the reef. That's the rule. And Moana, in the beginning, or in the opening song, uh, she accepts. She starts to accept na, no, this is where I belong. This is what I need to do. I need to lead my people. But the main conflict happens when they discover that the world is dying because the heart of Tefiti is missing. Okay? So she recognizes that this is what she has to do. She has to go and be a hero. She has to bring back the heart of Tefiti. Yes, the fan theories. I try not to read the fan theories because they are quite disturbing. But canonically speaking, meaning what actually happened in the movie, Moana goes through the hero's journey. So, yeah, the hero's journey, um there has to be something that inspires the hero. Okay? That kailangan may nangyari na may inspire yung hero na gawin itong task na to. So, and there's also sometimes a time when they think they have been defeated, but something else happens that will re-inspire them. Okay? So, in Avengers Endgame, just when, nung namatay si, spoiler alert, nung namatay si Black Widow, 'di ba parang down na sila, but na-inspire sila na hindi pwedeng mamatay si Nat for nothing, si Natasha for nothing. So, they went on with their mission. So, uh, that's what happens in a hero's journey. Tandaan, in a hero's journey, because of the role reversal, they do not always return home. Okay? So, in the case of Moana, hindi na siya bumalik siya doon sa island pero nagsimula siya ng bagong tradition, di ba? Nagkaroon sila ng mga boats, naging voyagers uli sila. So, that's the hero's journey. Tandaan lang sa hero's journey, it's almost always a happy ending as well. Okay? So, kailangan sa hero's journey, ma-achieve nila yung mission or ma-finish nila yung mission nila. Okay? Next. Ayan. Rags to riches. Can anyone read this? John Dave. Can you read Rags to Riches, please?
Rags to riches. Remember Cinderella? The classic fairy tale follows a simple rags to riches plot. The protagonist is
Trodden.
downtrodden, impoverished of otherwise struggling, and through a series of events, either magical or more realistic, achieve success. This type of plot often features of happy ending.
Ayan. Okay, so Rags to Riches. Thank you for that, John Dave. This is the quintessential classic plot line, especially in Filipino films or Filipino series. The best I can give you, because she's coming up to the top of my mind, Amor Powers, Rags to Riches. Diba? Marimar is a Rags to Riches. Sophia the First is Rags to Riches. So, because Rags to Riches is one of the easiest plots to write because it's the most common. There are many inspirations and there are many examples of it, so many that you can actually find so much examples and inspirations to derive or to write a story from. These ideas have been, remember that these ideas have been passed down from generation of generation to generation of writers. So it's a good, Rags to Riches is the minor plot of that movie, Queenie. Yes. They weren't actually poor in Beauty and the Beast. They just got a little bit more rich because, syempre, Prince um, I believe his name was Adam in that. The real name of Beast is Adam. Okay, so, of course, we have here our example is Cinderella. Of course, everybody knows the story of Cinderella from essentially a slave or a maid naging princess siya because she met Prince Charming. Sadie is another example of rags to riches. I'm telling you, there are so many stories about rags to riches that if inisa-isa natin sila, baka grade 12 na yung ibang section, tayo nagra-rags to riches pa rin. Okay? Because it's so hopeful. People like the rags to riches story because there is hope. Okay, that whatever struggle we're going through, there will be riches, or there will be success um, in the future. Yes, Annie, Pepito Manaloto. Yeah, thank you for giving those examples. Those are really good examples of this plot. And remember, it doesn't always have to be super literal riches. It can be just a little bit of struggle. For example, a student who is struggling with his studies, who is struggling with his grades, who graduates. It could be metaphorical riches. Okay? So, yung mga inspirational stories natin, usually nakikita natin sa McDo or sa Jollibee, nakikita natin sa media natin, where people from impoverished lifestyles, um, impoverished lives, essentially, they rise up. They rise through the ranks, nakakapagtapos ng pag-aaral, nagkakaroon ng stable jobs, nagkakaroon ng mga careers, because they worked and they struggled and they, um, kumbaga nagsipag sila. They were hardworking enough to achieve all of their dreams. So that's rags to riches as well. Okay? So, yan po. Again, most common po itong rags to riches. Next, rebirth. Rebirth, this is a little bit complicated. So, it's essentially a style of plot that follows a character's transformation from bad to good. But something has to happen. Okay? The rebirth is triggered by events that make the character reflect as to the reasons why he is the way he is. Paano ba siya nagkaganon? In A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, this is a story, Ebenezer Scrooge. I almost said Scrooge McDuck. Ibang version po yun. Pero same story. So, a very rich man called Ebenezer Scrooge, a very greedy person, doesn't believe in Christmas, doesn't believe in human kindness or generosity. Talagang greed and yaman lang ang pinapairal niya. And on Christmas Eve, he was visited by three ghosts. Ghost of Christmas past, future, and present. And all of those ghosts helped him see what would happen if he doesn't change. Okay? Pag hindi siya nagbago, ito yung mangyayari sa'yo. And he saw his future. He died. Okay? He died and no one was there to mourn his death. No one was there to miss him because he died a lonely, greedy man. So when he woke up alive on Christmas Day, he was a new person. Okay? These types of rebirth stories can also be called redemption stories. When people who are essentially evil or bad have something happen to them, so they deflect back to good. Okay? So that is ang essential po dito, dapat may mangyari. Yes, 100 Days to Heaven. Uy, throwback yan ha. Nika, that's a very good example. 100 Days to Heaven is a show where a rich, greedy woman is killed. Pinatay siya doon, di ba? Pinatay siya, and then she is reborn or reincarnated into the child version of herself. So habang nandun siya sa kanyang batang form, meron daw siyang 100 days para i-correct lahat ng masamang ginawa niya para makaakyat siya sa heaven. Ngayon, throughout the series, throughout the metaphorical 100 days, kasi ang haba ng series na yan, more than 100 days siya. Throughout that series, many things happened and many events were explained kung bakit siya nagkaganon. Bakit siya naging greedy? Bakit siya naging masama? Okay? So, ganun po. Kailangan po sa mga rebirth stories, may mag-trigger ng pagbabago nila. Hindi pwedeng gumising sila isang araw, nag-decide silang magbago. Kailangan may explanation kung bakit magbabago sila. And usually, yung pagbabago na yun, mangyayari at the end of the story. Towards the end of the story na. Okay? So, yan po ang rebirth. Next, overcoming the monster. Now, overcoming the monster, otherwise known as the good versus evil plot. This type of story features a protagonist, the good side, and they're fighting an antagonist, the evil side. Of course, since you already know it's my favorite, my example here is Star Wars. But it can also be applied to, for example, Encantadia. Hagorn being the evil side and the Sangres being the good side. Remember that this doesn't always have to be literal monsters. Hindi kailangan literal na monster or halimaw yung kalaban nila. Basta as long as it is a struggle between good and evil, it is an overcoming the monster plot. Okay? So, the struggle between good and evil can be as simple as uh, I a good public official fighting against a corrupt mayor. Mga ganon. That's still good versus evil. Ay, hindi kailangan ganito kabongga na may mga spaceship, may mga laser, may mga lightsaber. I almost called it laser sword. May mga lightsaber, hindi kailangan ganyan ka-complicated at ganyan kabongga. But kailangan may good side and may evil side. Sometimes the protagonist or the good side can be a singular person or a group of people united. So for example, the Avengers versus Thanos, the Avengers versus Ultron, the Avengers versus versus Loki. So essentially the Avengers versus everything. Okay? So yan po, overcoming the monster. Again, hindi po kailangan literal monster. They just need to be an evil force. Ayan. So, again, let's appreciate this poster. Yeah, favorite yan ni Ma'am Jane. Last is Voyage and Return. The Voyage and Return is very much like the hero's journey. The difference is, in the hero's journey, they don't return home. There was a change in how they changed throughout the hero's journey, so they don't need to return home. In Voyage and Return, the protagonist sets off on a journey but returns home smarter, having gained more wisdom and more experience. Okay? So, this is an example of this is Back to the Future. Lord of the Rings is a good example of this. The hobbits, bumalik sila sa kanilang they come back to their town, to the Shire. They came back wiser and more experienced because they have gone through a lot throughout the series of the Lord of the Rings. So, yun po. Sa Voyage and Return, tatandaan nyo lang, it's very similar to the hero's journey, wherein they have a mission, they're doing something, but in hero's journey, they do not necessarily have to go back. In Voyage and Return, they have to go back to where they came from. And they have to sort of magkakaroon ng realization na, this is where I was meant to be all along. Ganun po. Okay? So, yan po ang ating 7 types of plot. Do you have any questions or clarifications about the 7 types of plot? Okay. So, if there are none, let's go on to the next subtopic. Plot devices. Okay. So, this is the last subtopic of the lesson. Plot devices. Plot devices are story writing tools. Okay? So, story writing or storytelling tools are used to help propel the narrative forward or to give interesting twists to the story. Siyempre ngayon, usong-uso na yung may pa-plot twist. Okay? Siyempre lahat tayo. I remember a friend of mine telling me, because it was around Valentine's Day. And being single, I don't like Valentine's Day. And then my friend told me, baka naman may pa-plot twist si Lord sa Valentine's Day mo. Sabi ko, kung anong plot twist man yan, sa wallet ko na lang dalhin. Wag na sa love life. Okay? So ang plot twist, something we don't expect within the story or the narrative. But remember, a well-written plot device is deeply satisfying. A clumsily written plot device, yung plot device na nilagay lang doon para lang may mailagay, is a sign of bad writing. So with every one of these plot devices we're going to discuss, please make sure that you use them wisely. Okay? With great plot devices come great responsibility. Okay? Huwag po basta-basta lagay lang ng plot device. Okay? So, let's go on to I think there are 6 or 7 plot devices here. First is Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun is not a literal gun. Ayoko pong makakita ng literal na gun as Chekhov's gun. So, when we say Chekhov's gun, it is a detail that seems insignificant, very simple, very small detail, but ends up being critically important to the story. Here I have an example of Signs. Signs is an alien movie starring Mel Gibson. And in the movie, there in almost every scene, there is imagery of water. Either a glass of water, water from the sink, water from the shower, yung condensation sa windows. Basta there always has to be an image or a or the reference of water. Makikita or maririnig mo ang tubig. For the first time viewer, iisipin nila it's just imagery, it's just set design. Mahilig lang talaga, gusto lang talaga ng director hydrated yung mga characters niya. But in the end of the story, it became clear that water was the weapon they could use to kill the aliens. Okay? So, isa yun kumbaga ito yung plot twist niya. Na yung tubig pala, kaya pala lagi siyang nandun, is because importante siya. Okay? Akala natin walang significance, walang katuturan. Mahilig lang talaga sa image of water. But in reality, it was what killed the aliens. So it was very crucial and very important. So that's Chekhov's gun. Anthony Chekhov used it comes from the author Anthony Chekhov, who believed that every detail should be a critical point to the story. Okay? So ganun po. Chekhov's gun. Next, the cliffhanger. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina that sometimes climaxes are not resolved. So a cliffhanger is an unresolved ending. So ito yung makikita na yung mag-ina na matagal nang hindi nagkikita. Tapos biglang sa susunod na kabanata. Abangan. O, diba? My example here is of course Filipino series or Filipino telenovelas. Paborito po natin to. Because studies have shown that cliffhangers, when done right, okay, when not overused, can be more stimulating to the human mind. Ibig sabihin, mas gusto siya ng mga tao kasi yung mga tao napapaisip sila. Nagkakaroon sila ng they tap into the deep human need to know how a situation ends. Okay? But if you use a cliffhanger because you were lazy and you didn't want to write a resolution, that's wrong. Okay? Kailangan si cliffhanger, ginagamit mo siya as a thinking device to let your readers think of their own Yes, A Quiet Place part 1. Isa rin yan sa mga isa rin yan sa mga ano nangyari? Tapos yung part 2, iba na yung So, parang mapapaisip ka talaga kung paano siya na-resolve. Okay? So, when you use cliffhanger as writers, you have to be very conscious about writing it as a thinking piece and not just a way to end the story. Okay? So, hindi lang kayo magka-cliffhanger dahil trip nyo lang mag-cliffhanger. Magka-cliffhanger kayo because you want the reader to think about what would happen next. Okay? You want them to be anticipating. Okay? If you're not going to have a follow-up, at least they are still thinking. Parang they are still hooked. They still remember. A cliffhanger is more memorable din kasi as a plot device. Okay? So remember, when we are writing cliffhangers, it's because we want the readers to think, not because we don't want to write an ending. Next is the death trap. My example here is James Bond. So in the death trap, storytellers often use the death trap where they can create an elaborate and often slow method of offing the main character or killing the main character. And sometimes, most likely, the villain will leave the main character, giving him time to escape. The death trap is a tension tool. Okay? It creates tension. It sort of makes the reader think na, ay, mamamatay na siya, oh my gosh. But in reality, he will escape. Okay? When you are writing the death trap, the 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 hero will always escape. That is the rule of the death trap. Okay? Because the death trap is just there to create tension. Papakabahin lang natin si reader na kunwari papatayin na yung bida. Pero in reality, it is what? It is just there to create tension. Yes, it is more on spy movies, which is why we have James Bond here. The classic death trap is when James Bond is tied to a table and a laser is going to cut him in half. Eh mabagal yung laser. So umalis muna si villain. I forget if it's Blowfish or Goldfinger. Pero umalis muna si villain. Tapos si James Bond, syempre dahil mabagal yung laser, palapit na ng palapit sa kanya, syempre yung tension ng mga tao, hala mamamatay na siya. Habang palapit na palapit yung laser kay James Bond, nag-iisip na si James Bond. So, na-figure out niya na, ay, pwede kong gamitin yung watch ko to deflect, ganyan. So, nawala yung death trap. Naka-escape si James Bond. Oh, yes. Which is the point of the death trap. Nakaka-thrill, okay? So, usually, these are used in times na feeling natin maboborn na si reader. So, nilalagyan natin ng death trap just to have some tension. Edgar Allan Poe used the death trap plot device in his story or short story, The Pit and the Pendulum. Akala natin mamamatay na yung kanyang yung kanyang protagonist, but in reality, may dadating pala para i-save siya. Okay? So that's death trap. Next is Deus Ex Machina. Okay? So Deus Ex Machina is a very old storytelling device. Ginamit pa po ito ng mga Greeks, ng mga Romans sa kanilang mga theater. And it's a way of resolving any problem with something so powerful na hindi mo na kukwestiyonin. The readers won't question parang last minute, biglang may ganun pala. My example here is Encantadia and their Brillantes. Brillantes? The gems that they use. So these gems have all power. They control different elements. They're all powerful. But in the time of the most challenge and most hopelessness, biglang maaalala nila, ay, eto pala yung Brillante. Okay, so that's Deus Ex Machina. If misused, it can be, kapag masyado nating inasa sa Deus Ex Machina ang ending ng ating mga stories, it can come across as lazy as well. Okay, so the Deus Ex Machina needs to be planned ahead of time. Not just a spur of the moment decision wherein, i-Deus Ex Machina ko na to. Bigyan ko na lang siya ng soup. Alam mo yon, yung parang pa-ending na, tapos hopeless ng lahat. All throughout the story, wala namang superpowers, tapos naisip mo na, bigyan ko na lang siya ng superpowers, tinatamad na ako magsulat ng ending eh. Huwag pong ganon. Okay? Again, don't be lazy. Write legitimate endings to your stories and only use these plot devices as tools. Okay? Huwag pong basta-basta na lang tayong magsusulat. Ha? Okay. Next, the flashback. I'm sure you all know what a flashback means. Okay? This is when we essentially go back in time to explain short backstories, to explain events, to explain even the situation or the origins of some people or some characters. So, ang example dito, Slumdog Millionaire. So, sa Slumdog Millionaire, it was also made into a film way back when. So, in Slumdog Millionaire, the protagonist, I forget his name, sorry. The protagonist joins Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And lahat ng sagot tama. Lahat ng sagot niya tama. Which they find strange because the protagonist has never been to school. He has no formal education. He has no formal job or job training. They're not even sure if he can read or write. Ganun ka underdog talaga si protagonist. And then nagugulat sila kasi lahat lahat ng sagot niya dun sa Who Wants to Be a Millionaire tama. It turns out that because he knows all of these things because he learned them in his childhood, because he has a photographic memory. So what happens is that his life story is being told in a series of flashbacks. So every question magte-trigger yun ng flashback. Tapos yung flashback na yon ibibigay sa kanya yung tamang sagot doon sa tanong sa Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Okay? So ganun yung paggamit ng flashback. Again, gagamit po tayo ng flashback to explain certain backstories and concepts. Okay? Huwag po gagamit ng flashback na trip lang natin. Ay, magpa-flashback ako sa scene na to. Bakit? Wala lang. Gusto ko lang mag-flashback. Sabi ni Ma'am Jade Hindi po. Okay? Gamitin po natin ang flashback in a way that makes sense. Okay. Next, the red herring. A red herring is much like the opposite of the Chekhov's gun. Sa red herring, akala natin importante yung detail na yon. But in reality, it doesn't really mean anything. It can be irrelevant or it can be just a small detail. Okay, so for example, here, Prisoner of Azkaban, akala nila si Sirius Black, yung isang character dito, si Sirius Black, yung tumulong para mapatay yung parents ni Harry Potter. He was a red herring. In reality, it was Peter Pettigrew. Okay? So, ganun po. Usually, these are in the form of people who are being framed for crimes that they did not commit. Okay? Or this can be in the form of weapons. Ay, ang ganda nung sword. Yan yung pangpapatay nila. But in reality, may iba pa palang force na papatay dun sa villain. Okay, so that's what we call a red herring. Okay, so it is the opposite of the Chekhov's gun. Sa Chekhov's gun, akala natin walang kinalaman yung detail na yon. But in reality, it is very critical. Here, akala natin critical, pero in reality, wala naman palang kinalaman, or it is irrelevant. Okay, so that's red herring. Okay, so that's the end of our lesson. Do you have any questions before we go on to our synchronous activity? So far, none. Okay, are you sure you don't have any questions? Okay. So if you don't have any questions, I do have some questions for you. Okay, so sige. I'll ask the question first and then I'll choose someone to answer it. Out of all the plot devices, which one do you think you would like to write about? So out of the 6 that we talked about, which one do you think you would like to write about? Let's have Miss Comia Real. Out of our 6.
Siguro po yung cliffhanger or Chekhov's gun. Since feeling ko po mas magiging interesado yung audience if there's a cliffhanger or meron po silang malalaman na ay importante pala tong bagay na to, parang at the end of the story po.
So you like giving them like that satisfaction of ay that's a very good that's a very good example na another sige share kayo ng something a plot device you'd like to write about. Does anyone want to share? Let's see. Yan. Okay, Shelo, why Death Trap?
Ma'am, gusto ko po yung Death Trap kasi ayun po yung pinaka-part na nakaka-thrill po talaga yung mismong pati ikaw yung kahit yung pari po may patayan na nagaganap tapos mapapasigaw ka na lang kasi sa katangahan ng character.
Wag naman ganon. Ayan, katangahan. Yeah, mga kasyungaan, no? I-censor natin 'yan. Pero yun nga, the Death Trap is a very good pag kung adrenaline junkie or you're very thriller centered type of writer, the Death Trap is a very good writing exercise as well. Okay lang yan, nak. Sige. Another question. As a writer, how would you like to develop your plot? So, anong pwede mong gawin para mas ma-develop ang plot mo? Let's have Alia.
Um, para sa akin po yung gusto ko gawin para ma-develop yung plot ko is to not come yung mga ano po, yung mga part ng story ko, yung hindi siya magmukhang confusing po sa mga readers. Kasi some of the authors po kasi, yung mga iba sinisingit-singit na lang sinisingit lang po nila sa story nila ganyan para lang po magkaroon ng sense yung ano nila, yung plot nila. Pero ako po gusto ko po yung ano siya, yung nagme-make sense po siya, yung connected po siya sa bawat ano po details ng story para hindi po siya nakakalito sa pag binabasa tsaka hindi rin po nakakasawa. Ayan po.
Okay, so thank you for sharing with that. Shella says, for me, organized po para di naguguluhan yung reader. Okay, sige Marvin, what would you like to share? How would you like to develop your
Yung
plot?
ano po, ma'am. Siguro para po ma-develop pa po yung plot ng story is mag-add po ng mga interesting things po. Para mas maingganyo yung mga mambabasa na basahin po yung gawa mo.
So, interesting thing. So, that's very good. So, para may maintain natin ang interest ng ating mga readers. Sige, Johan. Sige, after Johan, the last will be Roxanne. Sige, Johan.
For me po para po ma-develop yung story plot ko po is I'll do further research po about the related themes po ng story ko. So that po yung connection po niya will be stable and will be sustained po and somehow relevant po na makaka-relate po yung audience po sa mga gawa ko pong story.
Okay, thank you. So, research and sustainability for plot. That's a very good answer, no? Remember as writers, especially for writing something that is new to us, we haven't experienced before, always do research. And last is Roxanne. Sige, Roxanne.
Ma'am, dati po kasi nag-try na po ako magsulat and then ng stories po. Ngayon, puro poems pa lang po ako. And dati po, tinatry ko na, pinaka-favorite ko po kasi na gamitin na plot device is yung sa science po, yung makina.
Deus Ex Machina.
Yan. Kasi personally po as a reader, mahilig po ako mag-pay attention sa mga small things. Kaya po gusto ko yung readers ko mag-pay attention din sila sa small things. And with that po, yun din po katulad kay Shella, gusto ko din po organized. Ayoko nang madami kasi nakakahilo po pag madami nangyayari. Tapos eto naman pala talaga yung nangyayari. So, yun po, yung gusto kong mabasa, yun po yung sinusulat ko.
Okay. Which is a nice note, no? Remember, as writers, you should also be good readers. Okay, so if you're having trouble getting inspiration or ideas for what you need to write, read. Okay, because reading is breathing in and writing is breathing out. Okay, whatever you consume in reading will be expressed in writing as well. Okay, so thank you for sharing all of those ideas with the class, guys. So with that, let's move on to our synchronous activity. Let me just set it up for now. Ayan. So, I want you to go to slido.com and enter this code. Joke lang yun. Ayan. Slido.com and enter this code. Ayan. So, wala mo nang boboto. For those who have already entered, do not vote yet. Okay? So, I'll explain the rules. Okay. Let me explain the rules. So, this activity is called Conflicted Conflicts, All or Nothing. Ma'am, ba't may pa all or nothing? So, it's relatively simple. I will give you 3 plot lines or 3 synopses of 3 stories. Each plot line, you'll have to choose from the choices given of which type of conflict that is. The catch is, syempre, you need to get the correct answer. The catch is that everyone needs to get the correct answer. Meaning it needs to be 100% by the end of voting. So how are we going to do that? You're going to talk to one another. Mag-on mic kayo, mag-chat kayo dito, i-explain nyo kung bakit yon ang sagot. Okay? So you have to talk to one another. You have to convince the entire class in a matter of 1 minute. Okay? 1 minute, ha? After I read the prompt, I'll give you 1 minute to talk, to discuss, and to make sure that everyone gets the answer correct. Kahit may isa na lumihis ang landas, kaya nga siya all or nothing, wala nang points ang class. Okay? Each prompt is 5 points each. Okay? So make sure that you convince one another, you talk to one another. Okay? Do we get the mechanics of the activity? Do you have any questions regarding the rules before I move on to prompt number 1? Okay. Johan says none. I take it that none of you have any other questions. Let's go on to prompt or plot line number 1. Let me read. In a world that has been destroyed by famine and war, a young girl is chosen to be a symbol of hope and overthrow an oppressive government and free her people. Again, in a world that has been destroyed by famine and war, a young girl is chosen to be a symbol of hope and overthrow an oppressive government to free her people. What type of conflict is this? Okay, wala mo nang boboto. Here are your choices. Mag-usap na kayo. Go. 1 minute.
Society daw.
Oh, bakit society?
Society.
Kasi may government na nabanggit.
Parang related din po sa Hunger Games, which is society yung kalaban po.
Tsaka yung famine, ibig sabihin niya parang taggutom, ganun, scarcity of food. So, society siya. Hindi naman siya nature kasi wala naman nature na sinabi. Tapos yan nga, government, tapos people, so society. Society siya.
Are you ready to vote?
Hindi po, charot.
Okay, may bumoboto na, please. Everyone needs to vote or at least a majority, 60%. So if there are 25 people here, 23 people or 23 students in this class, kailangan, diba, naglabas pa ng calculator si ma'am. Kailangan 15 people ang bumoto. More than 15. So, yan. Boto na po. Sige, I'll give you a few seconds to vote. Sana walang lumihis ang landas. Ayan.
Ma'am, ano pong mangyayari sa point?
Okay. So, kapag wala, ano yun? Mali lahat. Pag may isang lumihis. Okay. So, ayan. We have 21. Okay, I'll give you last 10 seconds to vote. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay? Okay. Sige. Hindi mare-reveal. Guys, bakit gusto niyong i-reveal?
Vote as anonymous yun, di ba po?
Oh, anonymous to. Anonymous. Siyempre. Bakit nyo to? Ay, wag pong ganyan. Let us not choose violence. Okay, let's see. Let's see if you get the points for prompt number 1. Ayun. Okay, so the correct answer is character versus society. So makakahingan ng maluwang, may 5 points na may 5 points na agad.
Democracy pala ito, ma'am eh.
Next prompt. Next prompt. Alex lives in a town where people are killed if they are believed to be witches. After 14 years of avoiding trouble, she is now facing a mysterious force that threatens to reveal her family's secrets. Again, Alex lives in a town where people are killed if they are believed to be witches. After 14 years of trouble, she is now facing a mysterious force that threatens to reveal her family's secrets. So that's plotline number 2. And these are your choices. Which one is it? You may start discussing now.
Supernatural.
Supernatural po.
Supernatural.
Ma'am,
Supernatural. And twist.
Don't
Ma'am,
just
may
convince me.
mysterious force, ma'am. Mysterious force.
alam mo yung mysterious force, tao. What other things can be, can be
The witch, ma'am. The witch.
Kasi naman may mysterious force siya, tas may nasabi po na witches. Parang yung mysterious force na po siya, makakonect na po siya sa pagiging supernatural.
And yung witch po kasi ay meron siyang parang magic skills or something about witchcraft. So, supernatural.
Tsaka ma'am, if magkakaroon ng basis po ma'am sa mga pagpipilian, yung character versus supernatural po talaga yung pinaka-exact.
Okay. Sige. May apat na bumoto. Sige, you can start voting na.
Opposition ba?
May nag-oppose ba? Is there anyone who thinks that it's not character versus supernatural? Pero meron ng 12 na bumoboto, so let's hope na kung sino man sila ay convinced na. Ayan. So, share ko lang when I was doing this in face-to-face classes. No, syempre hindi kayo makakapag-anonymous doon kasi kitang-kita. Ayan, nag-aabangan po sila sa kantin. Pero syempre joke lang 'yun. Hindi lang sila nagpapasabay ng kunwari yung nagkamali. Uy, sabay mo naman ako, bilang mo naman ako ng tubig sa kantin. Hindi 'yun pinapansin. Mga isang period. Okay. Sige. I'll give you another 10 seconds to vote. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Time is up. No more voting. Let's see. Okay. First of all, the correct answer is character versus supernatural. The clues are the witches and a mysterious force. Remember that sometimes, if the force is unspecified to be human, most likely it is supernatural. Okay? So, let's show the results. Ayan na. May kinakabahan ba sa inyo? Okay.
Meron.
So, sana okay na yung kaba mo, Alia, kasi you have 100%. Okay. So, last one. I hope na wala nang lilihis dito. Let's go for prompt or plotline number 3. Something has happened. His past demons and problems now haunt Elroy. His family is gone, and he must face the world alone. Can he return to his past self, or must he learn to live with his new self? Again.
Character versus
Wait lang! Excited! Nagbabasa pa ako. Saglit. Okay. Kalma. Mga anak, kalma. Last. Something has happened. His past demons and problems now haunt Elroy. His family is gone and he must face the world alone. Can he return to his past self, or must he learn to live with his new self? Wala pa tayo. Ayan, papunta na tayo sa exciting part. Go, discuss. Which one is it?
Sinigaw naman kayo.
Ayun na ba?
Self daw. Bakit daw versus self? What clue?
Kasi inner problems po yun.
Okay, inner problems.
Nakalagay po kasi can he return to his past self, or we must learn to live with his new self. Nakipagtalo po siya sa sarili niya, ma'am.
Saka doon po sa word na alone. So, it's just about between himself. Ganun po.
Alright. Okay.
May mag-oppose ba?
Okay. Is there anyone who thinks that it is not? Uy, Nika.
Huwag na kayo mag-oppose, Char.
Huwag na kayo mag-oppose.
Ay, sinigo. Sinigo.
Pinilit.
Ayan. So, okay. People are already starting to vote. Go. Okay? Ayan, boto na.
Ma'am, ano po mangyayari sa points namin dito?
Pag may lumihis ng landa, 0 yung item na
Paano ma'am kapag tama po kami lahat?
Pag tama lahat, edi perfect kayo sa activity. 15. I'll be assigning the activity in the Google Classroom later. I'll explain how you're going to submit this so that the points will be recorded. Okay. So let's have 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So let's see. Tignan natin kung sino po. Okay? Correct answer muna.
Self na yan.
Self na yan. Okay. Sa dami ng best lumabas yung self dyan. Okay. So, let's see.
Kaya nga,
Pag
May
may
napili.
naiba si Nika, okay. Wag na
pag
nyo
hindi
naman,
yan,
malay
pag,
nyo naman,
pag,
joke lang.
pag yung self, ma'am, magagalit ako sa'yo.
Ay, ganun. Okay.
Ibaksak yan.
Okay. So, next. Next. Okay, let's see. Show results. May kinakabahan.
Si Nika po, charot.
Si Nika
Mamaya
kinakabahan.
naman ng pindot.
Okay,
Kayo kabahan.
1,
Baka
2,
totoo yun.
3, go! Ayun. Aabangan sa gate. Kaninong gate nila? Ayan.
Madaming
so, congratulations. Congratulations, 11 sums. You got a perfect score for this activity. So, how are we going to credit this in the Google Classroom? So, I want, what you're going to do is take a screenshot of this. Sige. Mag-screenshot tayo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yan. Hopefully, lahat po kayo na-screenshot. Si Johan nakapost pa. Hopefully, lahat po kayo na-screenshot na ang ating Slido code. What you're going to do is, let me show you. Here. So, you are going to, I'll put it back there if you haven't screenshotted it yet. But so, this is the task for those who were able. So, all of you, those who were present today, you were able to participate. So what you're going to do is you're just going to attach the screenshot of this to the activity. Okay? Ipapasa nyo lang siya. And then because you got 15 points, automatic 15 na. Yan. Sa mga hindi nakapag-participate, and also I will be asking for a copy of the attendance from the class president so that everything is full and transparent. For those who were not able to participate, they will have to answer it manually. Okay? So you may inform your friends who are not able to attend today. Okay? So they have to answer it manually. Wala pong choices. Syempre, para fair. The consequence of not being able to. Ma'am, bali po kami nandito. No need po mag-answer ng attach na lang. Yes po. So lahat kayo nandito, no need to answer. All you have to do is attach this screenshot. Okay? Again, screenshot po. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ayan. Thank you. Si Johan. So, I'll assign this right away so that there are no problems. Because sometimes, as you may notice, I forget to assign things. Ayan. So, that's it for our synchronous activity. Okay? So now, let's go on to our quiz. Okay, ang quiz po natin, asynchronous po, 10 item. It will be identification. So please read the instructions carefully and of course type your answers carefully as well. Okay, so that is assigned for 4 p.m. this afternoon. I'll share the slides with you so that you can have time to review for it. Ayan. Pagpasensyahan nyo na, medyo mabagal. Ayan. So, ayan po. Those are the slides. You can use them as your reviewer. Next, ayan. Activity number 8. Our asynchronous activity for this week is combining the knowledge that you gain from studying theme, style, character, setting, up to conflicts, points of view, and plot. You're now supposedly ready to start or write your own story. So you're going to create your own short story. It must have a minimum of 500 words. Minimum po yan, so pwedeng lumagpas. A setting, at least 2 characters so we can see the development of those 2 characters, how they interact. A conflict, of course, para mas exciting, and the plot, a complete plot. Okay? So this is that activity. Let me just show you. So, that's the activity. It must have ayan, naka-itemize yung mga bagay na dapat makita ko sa loob ng ating story. And you have a rubric. So, the rubric, 10 points for creativity, 10 points for the organization or the plot, 10 points for the conflict, 10 points for the other story elements such as the characters, the settings, the theme, the style, and 10 points for mechanics, which is, of course, the grammar and how you spell certain words. Okay, so that's a total of 50 points. A commonly asked question is, Ma'am, pwede po bang Filipino? Pwede, pero kailangan 750 ang minimum. Okay, that's my caveat. Because it's already Filipino. It's already in a language you're very comfortable with. So I want it to be fair. Of course, those who are not used to speaking English but make the effort to write in English, they get only 500 word minimum. Okay? So, if you're going to write in Filipino, you have to write it in at least 750 words. Okay? So, do you have any questions about our activity? Clarifications. Ma'am, paano po pag Taglish? Ilan po 750 pa rin. That's still considered as Tagalog. If you're going to use Filipino in any aspect. Unless it's just a small quotation. Basta may Tagalog, 750. Deadline. Thank you for reminding me. Deadline will be June 13. So you have some time. You have a lot of time to plan. Remember our lesson in the first quarter. Before you turn it in, after writing, before you turn it in, step back. Okay? Take your time in writing. Huwag po tayong magmamadali sa pagsusulat. Napakagandang art po ng pagsusulat. Ang art ay hindi minamadali. Okay? So as much as possible, take your time, plan your story. Especially if you're writing in Filipino, you need a lot more words. So make sure make sure that you think about it a lot. Okay? So assign natin yan. Again, para hindi ko na makalimutan. So that is your activity number 8. So do you have any more questions or clarifications about our activity?
Ma'am, di ba po last week gumawa po kami ng characters. Need po ba dito sa short story i-connect po namin doon or kahit hindi po?
It's up to you. If you are more comfortable already using those characters kasi nagawa nyo na sila, napag-isipan mo na sila, then go. But if you want new characters to be in your new story because you thought of something new, okay lang rin. It is up to you. But it's not required that the characters you created next week will be the same characters here. Hindi siya required. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Any other questions? Clarifications. Violent reactions? Baka may galit? May sama ng loob? Wala naman. Okay, so that is all for today, class. Thank you for attending the lesson for today. Thank you for being my students this semester. This is our last meeting. I hope that all of you have a nice day and have a nice rest of the semester. Remember to study for your exams, all of them, not just mine. And for the last time, kung wala na pong clarifications, questions, or violent reactions, stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you when I see you. Goodbye, class.
Thank you po.
Thank you po.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you po.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Guys, keep writing, ha? Kahit wala na sa creative writing. Magsulat pa rin kayo. Ha?
Ma'am, thank you po.
Goodbye. Thank you, thank you.
See you soon, ma'am. Bye-bye po.
See you when I see you. Malay nyo next year.
Grade 11 na rin.
Hindi, may creative non-fiction eh. Malay nyo. Kunin ko. Malay nyo lang.
Okay. Thank you po.
Sige, bye-bye.
Bye, ma'am. See you soon, ma'am.
Bye-bye. See you soon. Goodbye. Ma'am.
Ayan, good morning.